And welcoming Stephen Cooper.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Jeannie, and so many of you. Family, friends, colleagues, students, children of John Fante, Jim, Vicky, and their families, including all the way from Italy, filmmaker Giovanna Di Lello. Thank you all very much for coming. I'm honored to be at UCLA this afternoon to share with you a few recollections and reflections about John Fante and my work. Like John Fante and Bonnie Cashin, the visionary fashion designer whose legacy this lecture series commemorates, the people at UCLA Library and Special Collections understand the importance of creativity. Thanks to them, to University Librarian Gary Strong, former head of Special Collections Vicki Steele, her successor and now director of Library Special Collections Tom Hyrie, manuscripts librarian Jeannie Gerard, Daniel Gardner of the Center for Primary Research and Training, visual arts specialist Octavio Olvera, Cindy Newsom, Annie Watanabe Rocco, Don Setzer, everyone else on staff. Thanks to them, UCLA is not only host to our gathering today, but also home to all 47 linear feet of the Fante papers. Starting now and for all posterity, this collection will be an invaluable resource for scholars of many subjects, from 20th century American literature to the Hollywood film industry, to, in my view, the most compelling, contradictory, emblematic, exasperating, and inspiring creative writer in the history of Los Angeles. Yes, John Fante. I'm also happy to be here. You see, 40 years ago this year, I graduated from UCLA with a BA in English. Heading out into the great world, I took with me a powerful sense of how literature mattered, how through reading and writing, I might find a life. That sense was at the heart of my response when, at age 24, I bought a secondhand copy of an obscure old novel. The title was strange, Ask the Dust, and the author, John Fante, unknown to me. But that book changed my life. From the first page, it possessed me with the voice of its hero, Arturo Bandini, and the way his Los Angeles of the early 1930s felt just like mine, a city filled with soaring desires and crushing defeats and the crazy-making search for love, as Arturo writes and dreams and pursues the beautiful Camilla Lopez to the book's haunting climax in the desert. I read that book and knew I had to write. But write what? A review. That's what, a book review. Brilliant. Of a book that had been out of print for decades. And me, a no-name wannabe scribbler. The odds were long, but the world needed to know. And so, brimming with a young man's certainties, I mailed my review to the Los Angeles Times, assuring then book editor Digby Deal that here was a masterpiece, a forgotten tragicomedy for the ages, all as if I knew what I was talking about. Well, it turned out I did, which didn't prevent my review from bouncing back, rejected. Not to be deterred, albeit 20 years later, I tried again. This time, after a 6-year adventure of research and writing, the book being reviewed was mine. So who was John Fante, and why does he matter to us in Los Angeles and to others around the world? What provokes people to call Fante the father of the Los Angeles novel and the patron saint of LA writing? What made quintessential LA poet Charles Bukowski go so far as to say, Fante was my God? These are a few of the questions I'll try to answer today, keeping in mind the Cashin Lecture's purpose, to celebrate the creative process. We'll start our celebration with a brief summary of Fante's life and works. Then I'll take up a few of the creative challenges I faced in writing my book and the ways I overcame them, or failed to. By the time we adjourn, my hope is that you can enjoy all the more the story that our exhibit tells. John Fante was born April 8, 1909 in Denver, Colorado, into a poor Italian-American family. In 1901, His father, Nick Fante, had left the mountains of Italy's impoverished Abruzzi province to work in the mile-high city. No matter how blue a state Colorado might be today, in the early 20th century, it seethed with anti-immigrant and anti-Catholic sentiment. The mayor of Denver belonged to the Ku Klux Klan, and racist suspicions of cat liquor dagos and papist wops prevailed. Growing up, the young John Fante thus learned firsthand the dark, sometimes violent lessons of American xenophobia. His formal education came from Sisters of the Blessed Virgin Mary at Boulder's Sacred Heart of Jesus Parish, where he served as an altar boy, and later from the Jesuits at Denver's Regis High. There, a fleeting call to the priesthood was lost to a mania for sports, a predilection for fistfights, and telltale plummeting grades. The cause of this adolescent turmoil could be traced to home. Although Nick Fante was an expert stonemason whose skills were in demand, his diehard drinking, gambling, and womanizing led to poverty for the family and a troubled relationship with eldest son John. Over time, these formative experiences left their marks on Fante, becoming central themes in his writing. As the country sank into the Depression, Nick Fante deserted his family and disappeared with another woman. Soon, John fled Colorado, hitchhiking and hopping freights to California. In blue-collar Wilmington, he began to write and starve under a merciless regimen. In 1 month, he claimed he lost 30 pounds while writing 150,000 words and devouring great stacks of Hemingway, Dos Passos, and de Maupassant. He eked out a living at menial jobs around the harbor: ditch digger, dishwasher, loading dock grunt. Through it all, he stuck to his writing, and in 1932 broke into print when H.L. Mencken published Altar Boy in the American Mercury. A book contract with publisher Alfred A. Knopf ensued. When the resulting novel was rejected, Fante plunged into another, calling it The Road to Los Angeles. Here, he fictionalized his experiences at a terminal island cannery through an archly named alter ego protagonist, the fire-breathing Arturo Bandini. Written under the spell of Mencken's iconoclasm and the nihilist dithyrambs of Nietzsche, Fante's searing satire of politics, religion, and sex was too much for its time, and this novel, too, was rejected. Against these setbacks, Fante found support for his outsized literary aspirations from Mencken. In return, Fante idolized the so-called Sage of Baltimore in equally outsized ways, revering him as a better ideal than 10,000 Jesus Christs, 12,000 popes, 90,000 St. Johns, 98,000 St. Teresas, and 69 million Jesuits. Defiantly lapsed as he might be, Fante's Baltimore Catechism was showing. By now, Fante had moved to the fated Bunker Hill district of downtown Los Angeles. There he met another Mencken protege, Carrie McWilliams. Despite all their differences, Fante, the hot-blooded writer of autobiographical fiction, McWilliams, a cool, intellectual, radical activist lawyer whose nonfiction writings on Los Angeles and California today are hailed as classics. Despite these differences, the two formed a lifelong bond. Via McWilliams, Fante met people in Hollywood. Soon he was a contract scenarist at Warner Brothers, alongside such other writers of note as James Hilton, W.H. Burnett, Dalton Trumbo, and William Faulkner. Thus began the split in Fante's career between serious fiction and the piffle he wrote holding his nose for a studio paycheck. But then, as now, the industry was fickle, and paydays were at best sporadic. So went the 1930s, a constant shuffle between studio stints, churning out B-movie undercards, and far less lucrative bouts writing short stories, and the first 3 of the 4 novels that would make up the saga of Arturo Bandini. In 1937, Fante eloped with Joyce Smart. Joyce was a beautiful, blue-eyed poet and Stanford alumna, but she was also the daughter of a wealthy WASP family that frowned on Fante for all he was, an Italian, a Catholic, and a writer. The marriage was volatile, veering from verbal fisticuffs to passionate reconciliations, on the carpet, in the shower, often several times a day. But owing in no small part to Joyce's gifted editorial eye, Fante's literary star was rising. His first published novel, Wait Until Spring Bandini, featuring Arturo as a boy amidst family turbulence in Boulder, appeared in 1938 to glowing reviews. Ask the Dust followed in 1939, one in that remarkable year's list of standout releases, including Raymond Chandler's The Big Sleep, Nathaniel West's The Day of the Locust, and John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath. True, sales of Ask the Dust suffered when a lawsuit brought on behalf of Adolf Hitler against Fante's publisher for releasing an unlicensed edition of Mein Kampf stole the win from the firm's promotional efforts. But with two critically well-received novels out and a forthcoming story collection, Dago Red, Fante's reputation was blossoming. And yet, because of the money, movie work always beckoned. This time it was at RKO, under the genius of Citizen Kane, Orson Welles. Welles's new film, however, the now legendary It's All True, collapsed early on in production, and as the war years darkened, so did Fante's literary outlook. His brief service in the San Francisco branch of the Office of War Information ended under a cloud, even as he was failing to finish The Little Brown Brothers, a long-planned California epic about Filipino migrant workers. Before the decade ended, Fante found himself hostage to family life, having fathered 3 of his 4 children. More to the point, he had wasted most of that time golfing, drinking, losing at cards, and in general, raging at the world. But when Joyce, fed up, challenged him to write or get out, he at last fell back to work. The result was his one critical and popular hit, 1952's Full of Life, a sunny novel about suburban parenthood and reawakening faith, which was also a 1956 smash film. But examine the manuscript right behind me, and you'll see how an editor's red pencil deprived us of a 5th Bandini novel, changing the narrator's name from Arturo Bandini to John Fante. Fante was disappearing into his own fictional alter ego, hiding in plain sight behind the mask of doting and devout husband and father. If this wasn't exactly an act of vanguard political engagement, maybe it wasn't such a bad idea in an age of growing political savagery, when writers were being blacklisted for the charge now aimed at Fante, namely of being a communist. In fact, Fante's mood had never been blacker than at the height of the Red Scare, but gone now was the wild-eyed young Arturo of yesteryear, replaced by the domesticated, middle-aged John Fante. Still, for a time the money poured in, and soon the family moved to a remote ranch house on Malibu's Point Dume. There, Fante would lay low, working when he could as a writer for hire, by turns well paid and broke, of mostly unproduced film and television scripts that he hated. In the late 1950s and early 60s, 3 writing jobs took him to Naples, Rome, and Paris, but these too were largely disappointments. Interviewed about his Naples experience, Fante put on a brave face. "Failure is good," he said, "not the kind that crushes you, but the kind that drives you on. Failure is a challenge. It's healthy. In a field where all you need is a paper and pencil, what have you got to lose? I like to fail." Brave face notwithstanding, with his books out of print and his focus breaking up in the endless hunt for movie gimmicks, Fante struggled to recapture the magic of youth when the stream of his prose had flowed. Nor could he find anyone to publish the fiction he labored over during the long, dry era through the mid-1970s, including The Orgy, The First Time I Saw Paris, My Dog's Stupid, and 1933 was a bad year. In the end, though, and against all obstacles, he managed to survive the drought. After searching for over 20 years, Fante finally found the key to writing about his vexed relationship with his father. In 1977, The Brotherhood of the Grape was serialized in Francis Ford Coppola's short-lived City magazine, with an admiring note by screenwriter Robert Towne. To have 2 young Oscar winners trumpeting his work, 3 if we count then future awardee Larry McMurtry, who in reviewing the novel compared it favorably to both the brothers Karamazov and King Lear. This late turn was a welcome boon to Fante, whose health was by now badly failing.